So welcome everybody to our panel, our sixth panel for the Global Family Systems and Psychosocial Resilience project. This is a Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund grant that we were awarded in May of 2020 in response to COVID-19. And the goal is for us to work with family systems approaches in communities around the globe. And we're hosting a number of panels until March of 2021. And so we're very excited to have two guests today, one from Namibia and one from South Africa, here to talk about their work in response to COVID-19 with families and psychosocial resilience. So welcome to all of you who are here. We'll record for approximately 45 minutes. We'll have each presenter give 15 minutes sharing of their work, and then we'll have time for questions after they're finished. So would you like to introduce Gameela, our first panelist? I didn't introduce you, Gameela, either.
That's okay. I think participants today know who I am because they're the usual suspects. I'm Gameela Samarasinghe. I teach at the University of Colombo. I'm a clinical psychologist. And Laurie and I are working on this project together. It's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist. She's Dr. Charity Somo. Dr. Somo is an educational psychologist in South Africa. She earned her doctorate degree in human development and family science with an emphasis on marriage and family therapy from the University of Georgia in the US. This in May 2020. She completed her master's degree in educational psychology in 2014 and her undergraduate degree in psychology in 2005 at the University of Laurie in South Africa. She completed volunteer work with refugee families from 2014 to 2017. So it's my pleasure to call upon Dr. Charity Somo to do her presentation today. Thank you. Would you like to introduce the other speaker before Charity?
Yes, thank you, Gameela. So our second panelist is Dr. Lahija Hamunjela, who is one of the few female psychiatrists and addiction professionals in her beautiful country of Namibia. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Technology in 1993, and a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgery in 2006, and a Master of Medicine in Psychiatry and Mental Health from Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences in Tanzania in 2016. She's a specialist in psychiatry and mental health in Windhoek, Namibia. She's a global master trainer in addiction and a senior adjunct lecturer at the School of Medicine with the University of Namibia. She's also the president of the International Society of Substance Use Professionals in Namibia. She coordinates various campaigns and liaises with ministries in Namibia, raising awareness about substance use, about mental health and families. In particular, helping society understand the effects of substance use around the country with families and youth. She is very passionate about promoting mental health as an advocate for people with mental illness in her country, and she's also the proud mother of two lovely children who are her greatest source of inspiration. So welcome, Dr. Lahija and Dr. Somo. We will let you have the floor, and we'll turn off our videos and mics, and whoever would like to start, feel free to start, and then at 15 minutes, we'll switch over to the next panelist.
afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for that introduction, Laurie. As said, I'm working in Windhoek as a specialist. One of the few people in my country, and I'm trying to do what I do on a day-to-day basis. Namibia is a very small country with a population of about 2.2 at the moment. And you find that mental health is one of the few domains that have been stigmatized and currently still stigmatized. And not only our patients, but also us as professional workers in the mental health are being stigmatized a lot, especially when we want to lobby for help or assistance. We really are struggling. So I find myself doing a lot of things. The culture, our culture is totally also different, that people didn't believe in psychosocial health, so psychosocial problems that involve psychosocial and families. So one has also, when I'm doing my treatment program and when I see my clients, I look at the cultures that they are coming from. Then I try to look at the perspective, how they understand the illness that they are presenting with at the moment, especially if it is, say for instance, it's a mental health problem, even schizophrenia or anything. So I understand it from their perspective. Do they understand it as a behavioral science, or do they bring it in as a cultural problem that came in? So I also look at how they define that. And then now, from the medical perspective, I try to explain to them what is it that they are experiencing at the moment and how can we help them. Psychotherapy and interventions, I'm finding it to be very problematic because people don't believe in that initially. Even if you find the person is really highly educated, at a point you find them telling you that I don't see the need why I should see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And when it comes to family, we have to define for them from their perspective, what do they see as family? Because a lot of people don't have families like nuclear families. So we look at it from the perspective of extended families. Who raised this person? Where are they from? Is it an uncle? Is it an aunt? Or is it a friend? Or is it just somebody who picked them up? Then on the other hand, I have a lot of street children that I also work with. Then when we are done with the patient now, we come to management of the patient now. After you are done with the patient, then you run into a problem of, where am I going to discharge the patient to? Is it out on the street? Because now if I can't find a person who can take them, because people don't believe in adoption here, then that is a problem. And if we look at in the public sector, because I also work public sector half of the day, is that we only have one mental health hospital in Windhoek and a branch in the north that covers that other side. So you find that when we are done with patients, they also then we don't have any way to dispose of the patient. And in the private sector, you also find that, yes, you can admit the patient only in some hospital. The rest of the hospitals do not want our patients because they say it's a risk patient. And currently, we only have one private mental health facility, and it is in Windhoek. And not everybody can afford to pay the services that are rendered there because they don't have the medical aid or medical insurances. So what I do most of the time, as Laurie said, I go on radios, on TV to raise awareness in different languages because not everybody understands English. So we have to do it in different languages. I also go to different schools to talk about mental health, the importance of families, what is family, how can a person survive in this world if you don't have a family, or if you have a family and it is dysfunctional, or if you have a family and it's dysfunctional, how do you manage? For some of our children, they actually, I give mostly trauma-based treatment or therapy, because most of them lost their parents at an early age. So that forces them to actually go into prostitution, and that also gives us a problem into how to assist them to get off the street, because that's the only way they know how to survive. Community-wise, I'm actually now, especially with the corona in Namibia, also our numbers are really increasing, and we are now doing, or I'm doing a lot of sessions on the phone with people all over the country. Initially, I volunteered to do for healthcare workers because they were very affected with COVID. But then it came out that the rest of the people don't have somebody to actually give them therapy to cope through and to manage through, because we were also on lockdown. We only came out of the stage now, but currently we are still having our strict restrictions that are adhered to. So we find a lot of anxiety, depression, suicide, also currently increasing. So I'm doing a lot of psychosocial support through the phone, with a lot of help from our social workers from the state institution. Yeah, what I'm running into, the challenges I'm encountering now is that community resources we don't have. Even if, for example, if I have a youth that is using substances, we don't have rehabilitation centers. The one that we used to have in Windhoek, that was for the state, closed down before the corona outbreak, because that was also used as a center for treatment. And for private one, we only have one currently that is operating. But as I said, due to resources, not a lot of people can afford. The other thing is manpower also. It's not a lot of people who find that they have the passion and the training. We need to have more people that are trained, especially in family therapies, and to bring the families together, how to reconcile, because people don't have that patience to work with my patients and the families, especially if they have relapse. Now, what do you understand about the illness of a mental illness or the substance use? Another thing is that of working with families, I find it also difficult for them to actually accept this person back into the family after what they have gone through. You find them, they are actually isolating or stigmatizing. They don't want, they are labeling the person. They find it difficult to actually move from labeling the person as a patient or a substance user to just come in as the normal person now, to take on the role of in their family. Another thing is the research-based, evidence-based here lacks, because I don't have capacity at the moment, and we don't have people that are really into research, and that is one thing one really needs to motivate and to take up and train people to help, so that we can understand it from our perspective of our country, how to come in, where is the problem coming from, even if we compare it to other countries, where are we standing, and what is making us more prone to having all these illnesses and different addictions at different stages, at different institutions. And it also varies from region to region. And we need to understand that also, And some of the illnesses, we find that it's running within the families, but then they don't understand that it can be genetic. So when we do research and have that compiled and filed, then at least one has something to speak from. evidence-based perspective. And level of substance addiction, I'm doing a lot of eco trainings in different regions, at least so that people in the different hospitals are able to manage from that level the people that come in, so that not everybody is referred to Vento, because we don't have the capacity to host everybody. So far, I have done very good in training. Also, the family, the youth who are suffering from substance use, I eco-trained that when I came back from Maldives, and we had a good number population that I trained. So I'm now presenting this so that we know where we are and how to get help from working what I have, from both public and private sector that I'm working in. And I'm also trying to introduce the addiction training in the university, but for now I'm at the starting level, because I have to understand what the curriculum includes and why we want to bring it in. So I don't know how far we'll go with that, but again, okay.
You have a couple more minutes, and we're just having a little trouble hearing you, but but I think just that last part, if you could repeat it. You said...
I said, which one?
I remember when you said you came back from the Maldives.
Oh, okay. No, I said when I came back from Maldives, there I also did the eco training of the training we got. I received in Maldives. What I did is I picked different people that were trained in the in UTC with Colombo, and it was a bit easier for me. The reason why I picked them, it was that they had the basic understanding of addiction already. So I just brought in, I added the youth part, or when you were having a problem of a child who's using a substance. So when they went to the regions, it was easier because they started practicing what we trained them into and working with families. And that is a really very growing now here, with especially with the youth. That was a very positive thing that we had. And I will still keep on that one. I don't know, I think I'll have to do a refresher course at some point this year, or after the COVID is finished, then we'll try to do a refresher course or a virtual. I'm not sure if you heard about the resource-based capacity building.
Just a little bit, but you said it was hard to try and find that for your country, like that was applicable in your country.
Yes, it's very hard, and I'm still trying to motivate for that, because we don't have people that are into doing research. So I need more capacity for that, because we need to understand it from our perspective, why we have certain illnesses, or why our people are prone to certain illnesses or behavior or situations, and what makes them resilient or what makes them prone to certain illnesses. So that is where we are.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just a comment. We'll have time for discussion after, but as we transition to Charity, Dr. Lahija, I don't think I realized how much of work you did that was raising, well, work definitely, but raising awareness about mental health. And I mean, I knew you were on TV a lot and on the radio a lot, but for basically messaging, we're talking now a lot about the messaging of public health and public mental health. And I didn't realize that was such a big part of your what you do. And I appreciated hearing that. It's very important for what we're doing right now, what's happening with COVID. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we can switch now, I think, to Charity, if you want to come on board. And I'm going to mute my mic.
Well, hello everyone, and thanks for welcoming me to this awesome platform. Thanks, Dr. Gameela, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much, Dr. Gameela and Dr. Laurie, for giving me the opportunity to share my work with refugee families. I just want to share my PowerPoint because I'll be using a PowerPoint today. And the work that I'm going to be presenting today is based on my work with refugee families in North Georgia while I was a doctoral student at the University of Georgia. And this work took place between 2015 and 2018. And so I worked extensively with refugee families, not just to bring them mental health as a marriage and family therapist, but also to bring them family well-being. And so I'm really excited to share what, based on my experiences, the inferences that I can make professionally from the work that I did there. Just as an introduction, right now, I just want to start by defining displaced populations. Displaced populations are people who have fled their home countries due to fear of persecution, violence, and war. And these people are not able to return to their home countries because they will still face persecution if they go back. Globally, there are 4 types or groups of displaced populations, and it's refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, and stateless people. Refugees are asylum seekers who have been granted asylum or refuge in host countries, also known as third country. For example, if somebody is displaced in Myanmar and they seek asylum in the United States, and the United States grants them asylum in the United States, we call the United States the host country or the third country, and we call that person a refugee person because they've been formally granted asylum before they arrive in the United States. Asylum seekers are different because it's people who flee their home countries, relocate into international borders without the necessary permission to relocate in the host country, and they apply for asylum once they're in the host country. Internally displaced people actually make up 85% of displaced populations, and these are people who have fled their communities and their homes, but they are relocated and displaced within the home country. They're not able to go back to their homes. They're not able to go back to their local communities because they fear persecution there. And then there are stateless people. Stateless people are people who have been expelled or exiled and persecuted by the country of origin, and they're no longer recognized as citizens of that country. And they actually do not have citizenship in any country. And for example, Rohingya refugees from Myanmar are stateless people because the Myanmar government has expelled them as an ethnicity in Myanmar. They don't recognize them as a people of Myanmar, and nobody recognizes them as a people in their home country, and so they become stateless. But I think colloquially people use refugee as a term for displaced people. And so that's how I'll use it as well. That's not how I'll use it. When I speak about refugees, I will be speaking about people who have been granted asylum in host countries, as well as people who are asylum seekers. And so as we stand, there are 24 million displaced people around the world. 11 million of those were displaced in 2019. And 2.4 million of those are refugees, meaning they are seeking asylum in other countries, or they have been granted refugee status in different countries. But like I said, 85% of displaced populations are actually internally displaced people. So the refugee crisis during COVID-19 did not abate. People are still being persecuted. People are still being violated in their home countries. Myanmar refugee and Rohingya refugees, as an example, a lot of the Venezuelan populations are also still currently being persecuted. And so a lot of them are still trying to migrate across international borders. COVID-19 also brought about a global standstill in relocation and resettlement processes. Refugee agencies were not able to process any applications for refugee status or asylum seeking. And then people who were granted asylum in different countries were actually not able to relocate because national borders were being closed and human mobility was restricted. So, for example, in January to August 2019, about 44,527 refugees were resettled in host countries. But from January to August 2020, only 11,893 people were relocated. So about a quarter of people that were relocated last year were only relocated this year. So it's a real problem for people that have been granted asylum but are not able to take advantage of their refugee status and start their lives afresh. Which also means that these people are stuck, they're stuck in unpleasant and chaotic situations without a real knowledge or idea of when they'll be able to take advantage of the refugee status in host countries. It is anticipated that there will be a re-emergence of large-scale petitions for asylum seekers once borders open. And that's for obvious reasons, because now refugee populations are not able to apply for asylum. So the people who would have applied this year, the people who would have been processed this year, they will have to be processed in the near future or next year. Experience, but these challenges have been exacerbated by COVID-19. And I want to talk specifically about 4 challenges. The first one is not a challenge, but I just wanted to point out that there are actually international laws that protect displaced families. For example, globally, the Refugee Convention of 1951 is a refugee immigration treaty that compels all countries to give fair treatment to people who have been persecuted from their countries and are trying to relocate, and to give them refuge and to host them as people in their own country. The difficulty becomes that countries have specific laws and policies that govern their own immigration policies under the Refugee Convention of 1951. So, for example, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 in the United States determines who and how will be accepted in the United States as an immigrant. Another, difficulty right now is that presidents reserve the rights to modify or to dictate how many immigrants will be accepted in the country on an annual basis. So any president at any time could cut or increase the number of refugees and displaced people that are accepted in that country. It is an advantage if you have presidents who are pro-immigration and increase the ceiling of accepted refugees in the country, but it's a disadvantage when you have presidents who really want to restrict immigration into the host country. And that's what we are seeing these days, especially in high-income nations such as the United States. And there has been an anti-immigrant political rhetoric and anti-immigrant policies. For example, an anti-immigrant political rhetoric is just the perception and the persuasion that immigrants are really a disadvantage to the economy. They drain the economy, their cultural disadvantage, and it's spreading negative perceptions about refugee or immigrant families. These political rhetoric and messages, they really influence how community members view immigrants and refugees. For example, I've heard a lot of local people down the South that refer to refugees or immigrants as the illegals, putting that noun on a human being And that's how people become xenophobic, because they see them as, these illegal aliens that have come to take away our jobs, that have come to take away our security, that have come to contaminate our culture. So anti-immigrant political messages are really negatively impacting the integration of refugee families into host countries. Another example of an anti-immigrant policy is that like I said before, the government reserves the right to change the number of refugees that can be accepted in the host country. And an example is the continued decrease in refugee acceptance ceiling in the United States. In 2020, this year, the administration changed the ceiling to 18,000, which was significantly less from 4 years ago when Obama had it at 110,000. Obama had it 110,000 in 2016, and then now, we are at only 18,000. So that's a significant decrease, and these decreases are continuing. And so there is a proposal by the White House to decrease the ceiling to 15,000. And so this example it's an example of the United States, because I worked with refugees in the United States. So I'm really familiar with what's happening with the situations, but this rhetoric and anti-immigrant policies is happening around the world. I saw a video clip of a government official talking about Bangladesh and the unfairness that Bangladesh has to carry with Myanmar refugees, and it was a really negative image of that. It put across the message that Bangladesh is overburdened with Rohingya refugees, which are people that have rights, and it is within our human interests to accept them. But that's not what politics is. That's not the message that politics wants to get across. And so there is an emerging belief by researchers and scholars that COVID-19 is used as a pretext for discriminatory policies. And we can see that, for example, in the United States, job protection has been used to further cut the ceiling to 15,000 from already a low 18,000. And so another challenge that has been exacerbated by COVID-19 is mental health. Now, as it stands, refugee families are faced with incredible amounts of stress from the attacks that compel them to flee their homes, to living in temporary resettlement situations such as refugee camps. And the added disadvantage is that they haven't, by the time they're in refugee camps or in host countries, they haven't really had the time to address their mental health. And so COVID-19 has brought about additional stress factors that refugee families have to deal with. And so a lot of refugee families are reporting increased worry and anxiety. Worry comes from the fact that they cannot seek health and mental health help against COVID-19. They do not have the financial resources. They fear discrimination, and they are worried because they don't know. Nobody knows when COVID-19 is going to end, and so they're worried about the future. And so you see a lot of despair within these communities because they feel that their future has been shattered further by COVID-19. Again, they're not able to protect themselves against COVID-19. There is no physical space in refugee camps, for example, to social distance. Resources, health and mental health resources. There are not enough hospitals. There are not enough people in refugee camps as it is. And now COVID-19 has really strained healthcare services. Unfortunately, there has been an increase in suicide behaviors. For example, suicide and increased rates of suicide attempts in Kenya and Uganda in refugee camps has been reported, especially amongst young people. Again, these are people that are in despair, and there is no help. There is no, or there's limited help to help them address the health, physical health, as well as mental health needs. And so another challenge that's tied to mental health is mental health disparities that we see for refugee families. And mental health disparities can be divided into structural, financial, and social cultural. The structural disparities are just lack of access, lack of mental health access. For example, when refugee families seek asylum and when they're granted refugee status, local government makes funding for them available for a certain period of time. And in that certain period of time, these families have to make sure that they're integrated, they have jobs, they're resettling well, they have schools for their children. So it's not always possible for them to seek mental health assistance in the time that they have the resources to do so. And so in the end, these people end up without the ability to afford mental health services. And another thing about financial disparities that's especially exacerbated by COVID-19 is that a lot of refugee populations have lost their jobs. And so they're not able to work and seek help where they need. And so they cannot afford, if they have to prioritize their needs, mental health help is really not going to be possible for them to get based on the finances. And then the social cultural challenges. The one that particularly stands out to me is that mental health for everyone has largely moved to telemental health. And, therapists and relational therapists have become incredibly creative about how to bring mental health to people's screen and Zoom and, all sorts of cool online technologies. However, this limits the amount of help that refugee families can get. For example, if they cannot afford data or technological setup that's required to facilitate telemental health. This is, of course, an exception with telephonic mental health. And I read a research paper that talked about telephone mental health service being not ideal, but being very effective and helpful for refugee families who are already receiving help. So that is something that's available. Now, what can we do? What should we do as therapists and as a community of service providers to help these families deal with COVID-19? And I really like the idea of psychological resilience within social ecology. And this idea of resilience within the social ecology is proposed by Michael Unger in 2013. But I really liked it, and it just given the contextual issues that refugee families bring into the therapy room, a biopsychological model, I think, is really the best or effective way to address mental health and refugee mental well-being. And as a model, the resilience within psychosocial ecology takes into account the biosocial ecological factors that impact vulnerable families. And another important thing is that this model considers how the different subsystems within the social ecology of an individual interact to impact an individual's mental health. And so one example that I have of an ecological model of resilience is culturally responsive approach. And I use this approach, and I have a bias, but I really do think that it is one of the models that is effective for helping refugee families for the following reasons. First is that a culturally responsive approach takes into consideration the cultural worldviews of refugee clients, right? It emphasizes the importance of indigenous mental health knowledge of populations. What it does, it attends to culturally expressed symptoms. I think we are at a point in the world right now where we understand that different cultures express mental health symptoms in different ways. But culturally responsive approach goes a step further and invites the client to it uses it addresses culturally expressed symptoms without relabeling them. That's what I wanted to say, right? Without relabeling them, without reconceptualizing them, but taking them at indigenous face value and trying to understand mental health symptoms from the client's cultural perspective. A responsive lens also addresses social challenges that refugee families experience. And so this is the view and accept that, clients are located within a certain social location. And I want to say it overtly addresses those social challenges, not just acknowledging them, but doing something about them. A social challenge, for example, we just talked about them, is access to mental health. So, a culturally responsive therapist will ask themselves, how can I make my services more accessible to vulnerable families, to refugee families? For example, what I did is a local refugee community agencies and did volunteer work and brought mental health to refugee families as a form of volunteer work. And so that's, if people are able to do that, that's something that, people are able. But the question is, how can therapists address the social locations of refugee families and make it easier for refugee families to receive mental health services? A culturally responsive approach also acknowledges and addresses structural competencies. Now, I want to suggest something radical. Maybe for some of you this is not radical, but I think this is radical, and it's something that my dear friend and colleague Laurie Jordan and her colleagues suggest within their marriage and family therapy. And that's therapists as advocates. Now, therapists as advocates are allies. Refugee families, they pledge their support, active support to refugee families to help them reshift the social locations that they live within. They also make and suggest policy changes. Now, it's really important. I think it's important for relational therapists to get involved in terms of changing policies, because when you work with refugees, you hold the key knowledge. You know what the experiences of these families are, and so you can use your experiences to inform policy changes for the benefit of refugee families. So one of the key important things about cultural responsive approach is cultural humility by the therapist. And the therapist has to really become self-reflective and contend, question, and debate with themselves their own social locations and how they impact their work with refugee families. And of course, have to deal with their own biases, with their their own privilege, and making sure that their privilege is used to the advantage of others and not to the disadvantage of people. Lastly, it's really important. One of the things that emerged from my dissertation is that it's refugee families, a lot of mental health needs, and it's really important to triage their mental health needs. And in the ecological model of resilience, Michael Unger refers to this as equifinality. In other words, the different subsystems in an ecology, or the different mental health needs, have got the same impact on a family. However, because of circumstances, some factors can have a more impact on a family during a certain time. So it's really important for family therapists and therapists to assess the most impactful disadvantages or barriers towards mental health for refugee families, and to make sure that they're tending to those first, because there are a lot of needs that refugee families faced. I think, and a lot of literature shows that as a starting point, it's really essential to help refugee families manage the stress that they're currently undergoing, so that they'll be able to adapt and reintegrate into the community. And that's it. There we go. These are my selected references. And I want to point everybody to the fifth reference. It's really, I mean, it's kind of the UNHCR has done a map. The United Nations High Council for Refugees has done a map of how COVID-19 has. Really easy website to navigate, but it will give you all the essential information that you need in terms of knowing how refugee families have been impacted by COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charity and Dr. Lahija. Thank you, both of you. Great presentations. Years and years of your work in such a short amount of time for us. So, so now the time that we have to open it to questions from the folks who listened and who are here. So some of those might come, if I remember correctly, come in the chat, and some might come verbally. So let's see what's there. If anyone wants to speak a question, I guess now feel free to put your mic on and speak if you'd like to ask a question. Reading the comments, yeah. And Gameela, I wonder also if you had any thoughts. We've spent a lot of time talking about displacement and refugees in the places that we live and work. It's interesting to hear such multiple, stories from different parts of the globe.
Thank you both for your fascinating presentations. But I think I'll leave it to our invitees first to ask questions if they like, and then maybe make a comment later.
Okay. So any questions, please, you have the floor.
Can I ask a question then? This is okay.
Yes.
Hi, this is Manjushri, and thank you to both the speakers because they really shared lovely insights about their experiences. And my question is for both speakers. One is for Dr. Lahija. I would like to know that, she said that there's a lot of awareness that she's spreading, especially in she's been working with multiple key stakeholders. So I'm just curious about, how do you balance all this, like awareness programs with services? So can you give a little bit of insight or maybe examples like, what kind of an awareness, what topics are the ones that you are probably offering to the schools and then the others? So how do you balance? Because, you might be working with schools, then you're working with college population, then you're working with families. How do you keep them connected? And that's a lot of challenge to participate with multiple key stakeholders. So I would be very curious to know a little more examples from that. And for Charity as well, I have maybe a comment as well as a question. I love the fact that she mentioned, and I've commented in the chat box as well, for the relational therapists to be advocates of policy changes as well because of the wealth of knowledge that they have through their experiences. Although it's a very difficult thing to do because to find your voices as therapists in policy decisions where policy decisions are made by very different people. So I would also like to know, because I'm from an Indian context, but like Charity, I worked with refugee populations, but in Houston. And the thing is that it's interesting because I worked before COVID, and now Dr. Somo's worked actually during COVID-19. So, and I could relate to some of these experiences, but I do want to hear how relational therapists can advocate policy changes and get people to hear them, because that's where the problem lies. How do we do that? So that's my question. And thank you both speakers.
Dr. Lahija, would you like to respond? Unmute you there.
Yes, thank you. That was a great questions actually. It as you said, it's quite difficult, but I'm actually trying my best. For the schools, for example, what I did like last day, we spoke about suicide, because suicide rate was increasing, especially in the youth. So I spoke about what are the symptoms that they can look at, and especially the teachers. How do they recognize it? And in a child who is actually suicidal or depressed, how do you come out to express yourself that I'm actually having these feelings of ending my life, or I feel worthless? What does that mean? To whom do I go to talk to? For example, if the person is scared to talk to the teachers, then whom do you identify within the immediate society of yours to express your emotions? Then, and sometimes I talk to them then to tell them, okay, whom do you feel most comfortable with to express yourself? And then what are the helps that are available? For example, if mental health, they don't know where to get it or how to get it, then I give them all the numbers that are available, and that it's okay to get in touch with your own emotions, you know. So the other time I spoke about, for example, there were students or learners that were very slow learners. Also important was like, how do you compare yourself to a learner who is only getting A's and you're getting a C, and to be okay with it? But also for teachers, how do they recognize these symptoms that this is a slow learner, and how do you identify this, and how do you help this patient, this student, you know? So I do that a lot. And in the community, especially now, I have like also pre-recorded sessions that I give. For example, we spoke about, now it was about acknowledging or accepting mental health as a chronic illness, you know. And for example, we have churches where we go and where people go and they're told, no, you must stop your medication or something, ABC. So I always tell them it is okay for a person to be religious or spiritual, but when it comes to mental, it means that you really need to acknowledge that these symptoms need treatment. And if we can get you the help and you still continue with your spiritual part because it's important for this person, it's okay. But we don't want to bring it in conflict to say that typically don't go to mental health because they don't believe in that, you know. And we also, as an individual, I also don't come in to say don't go for prayers, but important is what and how to bring it together. Also for policymakers, and that's one thing that we're also encountering here. It's like going to parliament members and ministers to talk about certain things that are not already in place. You know, it's very difficult. You know, I will give an example of I was motivating for methadone, for example, and I am encountering the biggest stumbling block with that. You know, like, why would you want to bring another addiction into the place when the person is already addicted to something else? But then we have to explain what are the pros and the cons of methadone versus the other things. Thank you. I hope they could hear. Oh,
yes.
Can't hear.
It was a great question. I think there was a question for you also, Charity, in there, if you want to comment.
Yes, thank you so much for the question, and that's really is a challenge to influence policy, and I think it's a lot of hard work, but in the end, it will pay off. But I've got 2 suggestions, and one of them is partnering with refugee agencies. There are agencies, there are non-governmental organizations that are specifically working to influence or change immigration policies. So you can partner with those agencies and make sure that you're giving them your voice as data, and your voice can be data from the field, to say that as experienced by people in the field, this is what refugee families are going through, and this is what refugee families need. My other suggestion is that, they sometimes, I know in different countries, there are bills that are proposed. So it's really important to vote for the bills, to comment on the bills, and to do what it takes to make sure that these bills, if they're pro-immigration or pro-refugees, that these bills are signed into laws. And it's very important to advocate for practical programs for refugee families. And again, that can be done with agencies. But I think collaboration between professionals is really essential because it cannot be done in isolation. So I think those are my 2 suggestions that I can offer.
Thank you. Excellent suggestions. So we're very short on time, but we probably can sneak in one more question if there's one that needs to be expressed on the recording. If not, I will stop the recording and then we can have our informal chat. And I will have to edit that out. I'm out of practice, I see, because I'm gonna have to edit the recording. So as people decide whether or not to ask another question, let's thank our guests. So thank you for welcoming us back to our second phase of the project. COVID is still with us. And this was one of the reasons we wanted to pace out also our panels to some degree, so we could have a richer picture of how we are adapting in real time. So thank you so much for bringing your story, which is multiple stories, both of you, about where you live and where you travel to do the work you do and what you've seen in the communities, in the families, in the ministries, in the policies that intersect with us, trying to do better to help families, achieve some psychosocial resilience, and also help other people do better to help families, psychosocial resilience. So I'm so grateful to both of you. And that's my spiel. Anything else we should add or any other question? Oh gosh, for a minute I thought I was on mute and nobody heard me, but you all heard me good.
We heard you. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? Or I think we can stop the recording and just have.
Yes.
Gameela, there is one more question in the chat box. It's by Anna, and she's written, it's for Charity. How are you helping refugees to deal with the mental health issues? Is there an office besides doing telemental health?
Okay, I'm glad somebody asked that question. So I am not actually working with refugee populations currently. I worked with them until 2018, and then I returned home in South Africa, where I have a... Sorry, there's a little bit of a feedback. So what I know in terms of help for mental health currently is from the literature that I read. So, and what the literature is stating is that it's physical office space right now is really limited for refugee families. And so there is one article spoke about telephonic mental health. And so that article was proposing that during COVID-19, the telephone method seems to be the best way to address refugee mental health. And they were saying that the disadvantages about that is that they're not able to help new families who are seeking mental help. It's only existing clients that they're able to help them. So it's easy to reach them. But in terms of, I think, office help, the transition is slow for non-displaced population, and it's even going to be slower for displaced populations.
Yeah.